Chapter 2. Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he rather hoped. Indeed, he was really, after all, to think that they had gone up without him, and without bothering to wake up. But never to thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, washed up, and he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out to the dining room. But by that time the sun was shining. The front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," he said, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? Here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, 10:30. They left you a message, because they could not wait." What message?" said poor Bilbo Baggins, all influstered. "Great elephants," said Gandalf. "You are not at all yourself this morning. You've never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? If I had enough to do with washing up for 14. "If you have dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note. It was written, of course, on his own note paper. This is what he read. "Thorn and Company to Burglar Bilbo. Greeting. For your hospitality, our sincere thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms, cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All travel expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be frayed by us or our representatives, if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed reapers, we have proceeded in advance to make the requisite preparations, and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, by water, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual. We have the honor to remain yours deeply, Thorn and Co." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You will have to run," said Gandalf. But, said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. But, Bilbo said again. "No time for that either. Off you go." To the end of days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside, without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands, and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mills, across the water, and then on for a whole mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater just on the stroke of 11. He found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo," said Balin, who was standing at the inn door, looking out for him. Just then, all the others came around the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggies, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently, for Bilbo. "Up, you two, and off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I have come without my hat. I've left my pocket handkerchief behind, and haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until about 10:45, to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Wallen. "And don't worry. You have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for a hat, I've got a spare hood and a cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to start jogging off from the inn one fine morning, just before May, on laden ponies, and Bilbo wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I dare think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when up came Gandalf, very splendid, on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs, and Bilbo's pipe, and tobacco. So after that, the party went along very merrily. They told stories or sang songs, and they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite often, as Bilbo would like to have had them, but still he began to feel the adventures were not so bad off after all. At first they have passed through the Hobbit lands, a wild, respectful country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads and an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farming ambling on his business. Then they came to the lands where people spoke strangely, and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they have gone on far in the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns. The roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, riding higher and higher, dark with the trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Most of it has been as good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they had to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it'll soon be June," grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain. It has been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes. His cloak was full of water. The pony was tired and stumbled on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. And I'm sure the rain has gotten into the dry clothes and into the food bags, thought Bilbo. Bothered Birdling and everything to do with it. It was just a home in a nice hole by the fire, with the kettle just beginning to sing. It's not the last time he had wished that. Still, the dwarves, they jogged on, never turning round or taking in any notice of the hobbit. Some behind the grey clouds, and the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark. Wind got up, and the willows along the river bank bent and sighed. I don't know what river it was, a rushing red one, swollen with the rains of the last few days that came down from the hills and mountains in front of them. Soon it was nearly dark. The winds broke up the grey clouds, and a waning moon appeared above the hill, between the flying rags. They then stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper. "And well, should we get a dry patch to sleep on?" Not until they did notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there at all. "Just when a wizard would have been most useful, too," groaned Dorian Norrie, who shared the hobbit's views about regular meals plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. So far they had not camped before this journey, though they knew that they soon would have to camp regularly. And when they were among the misty mountains and far from the lands of respectful people, it seemed a bad wet evening to begin on. They moved to a clump of trees, thought it was drier under them. The wind shook the rain off the leaves, and drip, drip. It's most annoying. Although the mischief seemed to have gotten into the fire. Dwarfs can make a fire almost anywhere out of anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not even Oin and Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out, Feely and Keely were nearly drowned, and all the baggage he carried were washed away with him. Or of him, excuse me. Of course it was mostly food. There was a mighty little left for supper, and less for breakfast. There they all sat, glum, wet, muttering, while Oin and Gloin went on trying to light the fire and quarreling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures are not always pony riders in May sunshine, when Mullen was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there. There's a hill some way off, and trees on it, pretty thick in pots. One of the dark masses of trees they could now see, lighting, shining a reddy, comfortable-looking light, as might as a fire or torches twinkling." When they had looked at it for some time, they fell to arguing. Some said no, some said yes, some said they could go and see, and anything was better than a little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes that night. Others said, "These parts are none too well known, and are too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come to this way now. The old maps are of no use. Things have changed for the worst, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and less inquisitive. As you go along, the less trouble you are likely to find," some said. "After all, there are 14 of us," others said. "Where has Gandalf gone off to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. Then the rain began to pour down worse than ever, and Oin and Gloin began to fight. That settled it. "After all, we got a burglar with us," they said. So they made off, leading their ponies with all due and proper caution in the direction of the light. They came to the hill and were soon up in the wood. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen. Such a mighty lead to a house or farm, and do what they could, make a deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and dratting as it went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly the red light shone out of a bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. "Now it's the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go on and find out all about that light, and what it is." "And if all perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the Hobbit. "Now scuttle off. Come back quick. If all is well, if not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl, and once like a screech owl. Do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go. Before he could even explain that he could not hoot even once like any kind of owl, any more fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits can move quickly in the woods, absolutely quietly. They take pride in it. And Bilbo had sniffled more than once at what he called all this dwarvish racket. As they went along, though I don't suppose you or I would notice anything at all on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade had passed 2 feet off. As for Bilbo, walking primarily towards the red light, I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So, naturally, he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anyone. And this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on long spits of wood and licking the gravy off their fingers. There was a fine, toothsome smell, and there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls. Obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that, from the great heavy faces of them, and their size, and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing-room fashion at all, at all. Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if I don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a blinking bit of man-flesh have we had for long enough, said the second. What the hell, William was thinking to bring us into these parts at all? Beats me, and the drinking running short. What's more, said, jogging to the elbow of William, who was taking a pull of a jug. William choked. Shut your mouth, he said, as soon as he could. You can't expect folks to stop here forever just before you and Bert. You did our village half between you to come down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time it up on our way, when you say thanks for Bill? For a nice bit of fat ballon mutton. Likey, that's what it is. Took a big bite of a sheep's leg he was toasting, and wiped his lip on his sleeve. Yes, I am afraid trolls do behave like that, even though with one head each. After hearing all that Bilbo ought to have done something at once, either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there were 3 fairly sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to toast the dwarf, or even Pony for a change. Or else he should have done a bit of good quick burgling. A real first-class and legendary burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It's nearly always worthwhile, if you can manage it, pinching the very mutton off the spits, purloined the beer, and walked off without them noticing him. Others more practical, but with less professional pride, would perhaps have stuck a dagger in each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read a good many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorn and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglarious proceedings he had heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult, so at last he crept behind a tree just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. Ha! He thought, warming to his new work. He lifted it carefully out. This is a beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. Are it squeaked as it left the pocket. William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind a tree. Blimey, Bert, look what I got caught, said William. What is it? Said the others, coming up. Blimey if I knows. What are you? Bilbo Baggins, a burglar, a hobbit, said poor Bilbo. Bilbo, shaking all over, wondering how to make owl noises before they throttled him. A hobbit, they said, a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake, and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. What's a hobbit got to do with me pocket, anyway? Said William. And can you cook 'em? Said Tom. You can try, said Bert, picking up a skewer. Ha! Wouldn't make a mouthful, said William, who's already had a fine supper, not when he was skinned and boned. Perhaps they're more like it round about, and we might make a pie, said Bert. Here. You, are there any more of your sort of sneaking in here woods, you nasty little rabbit? Said he, looking at the hobbit's furry feet, and he picked him up by the toes and shook him. Yes, lots, said Bilbo, before he remembered not to give his friends away. No, none at all, not one, he said immediately afterwards. What do you mean? Said Bert, holding him right away, up by the hair this time. What I say, said Bilbo, grasping, and please don't cook me, sirs. I'm a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if you won't have me for supper. Poor little blighter, said William, He had already had as much supper as he could hold, and he had lots of beer. Poor little blighter. Let him go. Not till he says what he means by lots and nones at all, said Bert. I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toe in the fire till he talks. I won't have it, said William. I caught him anyway. You're a fat fool, William, said Bert, as I said afore this evening, and you're a lout, and I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins, said Bert, and put his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left him when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the ways of their feet before they were fighting like dogs and calling one all sorts of perfectly true and acceptable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms and rolling nearly in the fire and kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses. And that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round. So there he laid for a while, panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight, up came Balin. The dwarves had heard noises from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back or to hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come up the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves, uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately. "And a sack of Tom, quick," they said before Balin, who was wondering in all the commotion Bilbo was and what was happening. The sack was over his head and he was down. "There's more to come yet," said Tom. "I'm not a mighty mystic. Look at none at all it is," he said. "No burr hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we'd best get out of the light." So they did, with sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder. They waited in the shadows as each dwarf came up and looked at the fire and the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton in the surprise when a nasty smell sack over his head and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, Feely, Keely together, and Dory, Nori, and Ori all in a heap, and Wine and Gloin and Beefer and Buffer and Bomber piled uncomfortably near the fire. "That'll teach 'em," said Tom, for Biffer and Bomber has given a lot of trouble and fought like mad as dwarves were when concerned. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came unexpecting mischief and didn't need to see friends' legs sticking out of sacks to tell him that things were not at all well. He stood outside in the shadows some way off and said, "What's all this trouble? Who's been knocking my people about?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. "They have forgotten all about him. They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he. "Oh, are they?" said Thorin, as he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught a big branch and all the fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up to the top of some bushes when Tom kicked the sparks up in the thorn's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that, and lost just one of the front ones. It made him howl, I could tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorn's head and down to his toes, and so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks with 3 angry trolls and 2 burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on top of them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo up in a bush with his clothes and his skin torn, not daring to move for fear they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls had decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later, and that was Bert's idea. And after a lot of argument, they had all agreed to it. "No good roasting them now, it'll take all night," said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. "Don't start that argument all over again," said Bill, "or if it will take all night." "Who's arguing?" said William. He thought it was Bert that had spoken. "You are." "You're a liar," said William. And so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a great big black pot, and they took out their knives. "No good boiling them when we got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. "Shut up," they said, "we'll never have any done. You can fetch the water yourself if you say any more." "Shut up yourself," said Tom. He thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing with you, I'd like to know?" "You're a booby," said William. "Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over again and went on hotter than ever until they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them first, and then boil them next time. "Who shall we sit on first?" said the voice. "Better to sit on the last fellow first," said Bert, whose eyes had been damaged by Thornham. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," said Tom, "but who wants to sit on the last one? Sit on him." "Which is he?" "The one with the yellow stockings," said Bert. "Nonsense. The one with the grey stockings," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "Then what did you say it was grey for?" said Bert. "I never did. Tom said it." "That I never did, Tom." "It was you." "2 to 1, so shut your mouth," said Bert. "Who are you talking to?" said William. "Now stop it," said Tom and Bert together. "The night's getting on and dawn's coming early. Let's get on with it." "Don't take you all and be stoned to you," said a voice that sounded like William's, but it wasn't. For just at that moment a light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to the stone. He stooped, and Bert and Tom were struck like rocks, and they looked at him. And there they stand, to this day, all alone, unless a bird perches on them. For trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of mountains that they're made of, and never move again. That is what was happened to Bert, Tom, and William. "Excellent," said Gandalf, and he stepped from behind a tree, and he helped Bilbo to climb down out of the thorn bush. Then Bilbo, he understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarreling until the light came up and made an end to them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and to let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there, listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what happened to him twice over because they were so satisfied. "Silly time to go practice pinching and pocket-picking," said Bombur. "What, when we wanted a fire and food?" "And that's just what you wouldn't have gotten, those fellows, without a struggle. In any case," said Gandalf. "Anyhow, you are wasting time now. Don't you realize that the trolls must have a cave, or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it." They searched about, and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came upon a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed, while Gandalf tried various incantations. "Would this be any good?" asked Bilbo. "I found it on the ground when the trolls had their fight." He held out a large key. though no doubt William thought it was a very small and secret. It must have fallen out of the pocket very luckily before he was turned to stone. "Why on earth didn't you mention it before?" they cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted in the keyhole. Then the stone door swung open with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air. But there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground amongst an untidy litter of plunder. All sorts, from bass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls. And too small for trolls. I am afraid they did belong to the victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught the eyes particularly because of their beautiful scabbards and jeweled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have been made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for the hobbit. "These look like good blades," said the wizard, half drawing them and looking at them curiously. "They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among these men in these parts and days. But when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them." "Let's get out of this horrible smell," said Feely. So they carried out the pots of coins and such food, all that was untouched and looked fit to eat, and one of the barrel of ale, which was still full. By that time, it felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up to what they have got from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were scanty. Now they had bread, cheese, and plenty of ale and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire, and that they slept, for their night has not been disturbed, and they did nothing more till the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies and carried away the pots of gold and buried them very secretly not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted up once more and jogged along again on the path toward the east. "Where did you go to, if I may ask?" said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. "To look ahead," said he. "And what brought you back in the nick of time?" "Looking behind," said he. "Exactly," said Thorin. "But you could be more plain." "I went out to spy out our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell." "Where's that?" asked Bilbo. "Don't interrupt," said Gandalf. "You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, to find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrod's people. They were hurrying along for fear of the trolls. It was then who told me that 3 of them have come down from the mountain and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they're waylaid strangers. I immediately had the feeling that I wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or should we never get anywhere." "Thank you," said Thorin. That's the end of Chapter 2, The Hobbit. Chapter is Roast Mutton, ended on page 54. Well, thanks for coming by and listening. I do like reading books for you. If there's something that you want me to read, or you want me to continue with a different story, put it in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Otherwise, I'm going to come back with Chapter 3 next week. A short rest. This is Kriswixx. Thanks for listening. Take care. Be good humans.